Have you ever woken up with that feeling that today would be different? You planned everything the night before, promised yourself that this time it would happen, but when the alarm went off, something simply shut down inside you. And now you're here, asking yourself, what's wrong with me? Here's the truth nobody tells you. You're not lazy. Your brain is working exactly as it should, protecting you from an invisible threat it identifies every time you try to change. The ancient samurai knew about this inner enemy over 800 years ago. They had a name for it, and as long as you don't understand this hidden mechanism, you'll keep riding this roller coaster of motivation that disappears out of nowhere. In the next few minutes, you'll discover why discipline has nothing to do with willpower. You'll understand the forgotten principle of Bushido that transforms resistance into power, and most importantly, you'll learn the method of warriors who conquered the internal battle before even entering combat. If you're tired of feeling stuck while everyone else seems to be moving forward, stay here, because what comes next changes everything. There's a moment that happens every single day, and most people never notice it. You're about to do something important, something that matters, and right before you move, there's a whisper, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet suggestion that maybe you should wait. Maybe tomorrow would be better. Maybe you're not ready yet. The samurai called this presence Naijin no Akuma, the inner demon. But unlike Western ideas of fighting your demons, they understood something completely different. This voice wasn't an enemy to defeat. It was a teacher in disguise, showing you exactly where your spirit needed strengthening. In the Bushido code, every obstacle contained its own lesson, and the biggest obstacle was always internal. Here's what happens in your brain during that moment. Your body has been keeping you alive for years using the same patterns, the same routines, the same safe behaviors. When you try to do something new, something different, your nervous system reads it as danger. The ancient warriors observed this in themselves during meditation. They would sit in seiza position for hours, watching their thoughts rise and fall like waves, noticing how resistance appeared the moment before growth. In the dojos of feudal Japan, masters taught their students about ma, the space between intention and action. This gap, sometimes lasting only a heartbeat, was where most battles were lost. Not on the battlefield, but in that tiny pause where the inner demon whispered its doubts. A warrior who hesitated for even a breath could lose his life. So they trained not to eliminate fear, but to move through it like water flowing around a stone. The feeling arrives as heaviness in your chest, a sudden urge to do anything except what you planned. Check something, clean something, wait for better conditions. The samurai recognized this as Kokoro no Kage, the shadow of the heart. Every person carried this shadow. The difference between a master and a student wasn't the absence of shadow, but the relationship with it. They noticed something fascinating during their training. The inner demon never told them to stop completely. It was always temporary. Just today, just this once, just until conditions aligned perfectly. This aligned with the Buddhist principle of mujo, impermanence. The voice promised that discomfort was permanent while comfort could wait. But the masters knew the reverse was true. Discomfort passes, opportunity doesn't. In Zen temples, monks practiced zazen, sitting meditation that brought them face to face with this resistance every single day. Legs screaming, mind racing, every fiber wanting to move. The practice wasn't to become comfortable. It was to stay present with discomfort until you realized it couldn't actually harm you. This understanding transferred to everything else. The voice had no power except what you gave it. Most warriors who abandoned their training didn't lack skill or strength. They failed because they believed the inner demon spoke truth. But the masters taught Mizu no Kokoro, mind like water. Water doesn't argue with obstacles. It doesn't wait for them to move. It simply finds its way through, around, over. When resistance appeared, they acknowledged it the way you'd bow to a training partner before practice, then moved anyway. There's a story passed down through sword schools about the moment before striking. The greatest swordsman described a point of absolute clarity, where thought disappeared and only action remained. But before that clarity came a moment of doubt, a whisper suggesting they weren't fast enough, weren't ready, should reconsider. Every single time. The masters learned to recognize this doubt as the doorway, not the wall. This is why samurai trained in mokuso, brief meditation before and after practice. They sat with their resistance, observed it without judgment, and understood its nature. Not an enemy, not truth. Just an old program trying to keep them safe from a danger that no longer existed. The way forward wasn't to fight this program, but to see through it. Your brain will keep running this protection system because survival patterns don't update easily. The samurai didn't waste energy trying to rewire something that took thousands of years to develop. Instead, they developed fudoshin, the immovable mind, not because it felt no fear, but because it moved despite fear. This distinction changes everything, and it reveals why trying to build discipline the way most people do actually makes it harder. You've been lied to about how change happens, not by any single person, but by a story so common that everyone believes it without question. The story says this: decide what you want, make a big plan, commit fully, and push through until you reach the top. It sounds right. It feels motivating, and it's exactly why you keep failing. In ancient Japan, there was a practice called Kaizen that emerged from Zen monasteries and later shaped how warriors approached mastery. The word breaks down simply: Kai, meaning change, Zen, meaning good. But the philosophy behind it rejected everything modern culture teaches about transformation. Instead of dramatic overhauls and grand commitments, Kaizen focused on changes so small, they seemed almost insulting. A young samurai would enter training expecting to learn devastating techniques immediately. Instead, his master might have him practice breathing for months, just breathing, or holding his sword in position without moving, or walking a specific way. These weren't preparations for the real training. This was the training. Because the masters understood something about human nature that most people miss. Your system can't detect small changes as threats. Remember that protection mechanism we talked about before? It activates based on the size of the deviation from normal. When you decide to wake up 2 hours earlier starting tomorrow, exercise for an hour, change your entire diet, and rebuild your life, every alarm in your nervous system starts screaming. Not because these things are bad, but because the change is massive. Your brain interprets massive change the same way it interprets danger, and it will do everything possible to return you to baseline. This is the mountain deception. You look at where you want to be, see the enormous distance, and think the solution is to climb faster, push harder, commit more intensely. But mountains aren't conquered through force. Ask anyone who's actually climbed one. They'll tell you about pace, about rhythm, about moving so steadily that your body forgets it's climbing. The moment you push too hard, your system rebels. In the Rinzai Zen tradition, monks were given koans, puzzling questions meant to break linear thinking. One famous koan asked, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" Students would struggle for years trying to find the answer through force of intellect. The realization came only when they stopped trying so hard, when they approached the question with gentle persistence instead of aggressive effort. This same principle applied to every aspect of warrior training. There's a reason swordmasters spent decades perfecting a single cut. Not because the cut was complicated, but because mastery required the movement to become invisible to the conscious mind. You can't force that. You can't decide to master something through willpower. The body learns through repetition so subtle, so consistent, that it integrates the new pattern without resistance. One cut, repeated 10,000 times, each one slightly more refined than the last. Think about something you do effortlessly now. Maybe it's driving or typing or speaking your native language. You didn't learn these through intense 30-day challenges. You learned through exposure so regular, so undramatic, that your brain had no reason to reject it. That's the secret hidden in plain sight. The things that stick are the things that slip in quietly. Most people hear this and feel disappointed. They want the dramatic transformation, the before and after photo, the inspiring story of total reinvention. The ego loves that narrative. But the samurai learned to distrust ego-driven goals because ego burns hot and fast, then disappears. What remains is structure, habit, pattern. And patterns form through repetition, not intensity. Here's what this looks like in practice. You want to become someone who trains every day? Don't start with hour-long sessions. Start with putting on your training clothes. That's it. Just the clothes. It sounds absurd, almost offensive. But this is how you bypass the inner demon we discussed earlier. The resistance can't mobilize against something so small. There's nothing to fight. You're just putting on clothes. The principle of Mushotoku in Zen means non-attachment to outcome. Warriors trained not to achieve a specific rank or defeat a particular opponent, but because training itself was the point. This freed them from the anxiety of results and allowed them to focus on the only thing they could control: the next single step. Not the whole mountain. Not even the next 100 steps. Just one. When you approach discipline this way, something strange happens. The small action creates a tiny bit of momentum. Momentum reduces friction. Reduced friction makes the next action easier, not through willpower, but through physics. A body in motion stays in motion, but you have to actually get in motion first, and that requires starting smaller than your ego finds acceptable. This is why New Year's resolutions fail at such predictable rates. January 1st arrives, and millions of people try to climb their entire mountain on day one. By February, they're back at the bottom, convinced something is wrong with them. Nothing is wrong with them. They just believed the deception that big goals require big actions. The samurai knew the opposite was true. The bigger the goal, the smaller your starting step needs to be. And speaking of steps, there's a specific way to take them that makes all the difference. Watch a master swordsman, and you'll notice something unsettling. The blade moves, but you can't see the effort. There's no tension in the shoulders, no strain in the face, no visible struggle. The cut simply happens, smooth as water, sharp as lightning. Beginners assume this comes from years of building strength. They're wrong. It comes from years of learning to stop trying so hard. The Japanese concept of mushin translates roughly as no mind. But that translation misses the depth. Mushin describes a state where action flows without conscious interference, where the thinking mind steps aside and lets the body do what it already knows. Western culture treats this as some mystical achievement reserved for masters, but the samurai understood it as the natural result of correct practice, and more importantly, they knew exactly how to develop it. Here's the paradox that stops most people. You can't force effortlessness. The harder you try to relax, the more tense you become. The more you focus on being natural, the more artificial you feel. This is because effort and ease exist in different modes of consciousness. Effort lives in the thinking mind, the part that plans and analyzes and judges. Ease lives in the body, the part that acts without deliberation. Think about the last time you tried really hard at something and it fell apart. Maybe you were explaining something you knew well but couldn't find the words. Maybe you were trying to remember a name and it vanished the moment you reached for it. Maybe you were attempting to fall asleep and the attempt itself kept you awake. The common thread? Conscious effort interfering with automatic process. In traditional archery, kyudo, students learn that aiming doesn't hit the target. Sounds backward, right? But masters explain it this way: when you aim consciously, you create tension. Tension throws off alignment. Misalignment moves the arrow. So instead, they train students to position their body correctly, draw the bow properly, and release without trying to control the outcome. The target gets hit not through aiming, but through removing everything that prevents natural accuracy. This same principle shaped how samurai approached combat. A fighter thinking about his next move was already too slow. By the time thought became action, the opportunity had passed. So they drilled techniques thousands of times until the body could respond faster than thought. Not through muscle memory alone, but through teaching the conscious mind to get out of the way. The secret lies in something they called keiko, which means practice but with a specific quality. Not practice to achieve something later, but practice as the thing itself. When you train with keiko, you're not preparing to be good someday. You're being complete in this moment, with this technique, at this level. The improvement happens as a side effect, not as the goal. Most people practice discipline like they're building up ammunition for a future battle. They force themselves through workouts, saving up willpower, grinding through resistance. This creates a relationship with action that's inherently painful. Every rep is a struggle, every day is a fight. The body learns to associate the activity with suffering, which makes the inner demon's job easier. Why would you choose something that hurts? But when you shift into effortless discipline, the whole dynamic changes. You're not forcing yourself to write, you're sitting down and letting words come. You're not dragging yourself to train, you're allowing your body to move. The distinction seems subtle, almost too simple to matter. But it's the difference between swimming against the current and floating with it. Here's how this looks in real life. Instead of grimly committing to your task, you make the conditions easy and let yourself begin. The samurai would prepare their space, settle their breathing, and wait for the natural impulse to move. Not waiting passively, but creating readiness. When the moment arrived, action flowed because nothing was blocking it. This is why masters could maintain discipline for decades while motivated beginners burned out in weeks. The beginners ran on force, and force depletes. The masters ran on flow, and flow sustains itself. They had discovered that discipline isn't something you do to yourself. It's something you allow to happen through you when you remove the obstacles. The biggest obstacle? The belief that it should feel hard, that suffering equals progress, that if it doesn't hurt, you're not trying enough. These ideas are so embedded in modern thinking that suggesting otherwise sounds like laziness. But the samurai would say the opposite. Struggling proves you're doing it wrong. The blade cuts best when the hand is relaxed. Life works the same way. Which brings us to something that sounds completely backward, but changes everything once you understand it. There's a space between deciding and doing that most people rush through without noticing. The mind says go, and the body moves. Simple as that. But the samurai built their entire practice around what happened in that gap, that fraction of a second before movement begins. They called it ma-ai, the critical distance, and it applied not just to combat spacing, but to the interval between intention and execution. In that space, everything gets decided. Not consciously, not deliberately, but through patterns so deep you don't realize they're running. This is where the inner demon makes its final stand, where the mountain deception tries to overwhelm you, where the struggle against effortlessness begins. And this is exactly where the warrior learns to wait. Western thinking treats waiting as passive, as wasted time. If you're not moving forward, you're falling behind. The grind culture, the hustle mentality, the constant push for more, faster, now. But in the dojo, students learned that premature action was worse than no action. A strike launched before the moment was ready would fail, regardless of speed or strength. Victory belonged to the one who could inhabit the silence without filling it. This practice had a name, mokuso. Before and after training, warriors would sit in meditation, but not the kind where you empty your mind or achieve some blissful state. This was active stillness, paying attention to the space before movement, watching thoughts arise without following them, feeling impulses appear without acting on them, building the capacity to exist in potential without collapsing into action. Most people can't do this for even 10 seconds. The discomfort is immediate. The mind starts generating reasons to move, things to check, tasks to complete. Sitting still feels like dying because we've confused activity with aliveness. But the samurai understood that real power accumulated in stillness, not motion. A drawn bow holds more potential than an arrow in flight. The silence before the strike contains the strike itself. Here's what happens when you practice this. You wake up and immediately reach for your phone. But before your hand moves, you pause. 3 breaths. Not thinking about whether you should check it, not making it a moral issue, just breathing in the space before the automatic action. What you'll notice is uncomfortable. There's a pressure, an urgency, a sense that something terrible will happen if you don't move right now. That's not reality. That's pattern protecting itself. The same thing happens with every habitual behavior. Before you eat what you weren't planning to eat, there's a moment. Before you skip what you committed to do, there's a gap. Before you distract yourself from what matters, there's a space. Most people live their entire lives never noticing these moments because they move too fast. The pattern triggers, the action follows, and consciousness catches up later wondering what happened. In Zen archery, the master teaches the student to wait at full draw until the arrow releases itself. Not until you decide to release it. Until the release happens naturally, when tension and relaxation find perfect balance. Students find this infuriating. They want to control the moment, but control is exactly what creates imperfection. The perfect shot comes when you stop trying to make it happen. This isn't mystical. It's about recognizing that your conscious mind is slow, clumsy, and usually wrong about timing. Your body knows when the moment is right. Your intuition understands readiness. But you've been trained to override these signals with thought, with force, with should and must and have to. The samurai spent years unlearning that training. What makes this practice powerful is how it changes your relationship with impulse. Instead of being controlled by every urge or rigidly suppressing them, you develop a third option: witnessing. The urge appears, you see it clearly, and then you choose. Not from discipline in the forced sense, but from clarity about what you actually want versus what the pattern wants. Think about the difference. Forced discipline says, I will not check my phone even though I desperately want to. Witness discipline says, there's an urge to check my phone, I see it, it will pass. One is a fight. The other is an observation. One depletes you, the other teaches you. The samurai chose the path that taught, because they understood that every battle fought internally was energy unavailable for what actually mattered. This is why their training emphasized zazen, sitting meditation, as much as sword work. Not to become peaceful or enlightened, but to develop the capacity to see clearly in the moment before action. That capacity transferred to everything. The warrior who could sit with discomfort without reacting, could stand in battle without panic. The student who could observe an urge without following it could break any pattern limiting them. The modern world has eliminated almost all silence. Noise, stimulation, distraction fill every gap. This isn't accidental. A person who can sit with themselves, who can inhabit the space before action, who can witness their patterns without being controlled by them, that person is dangerous to systems that profit from unconscious behavior. The samurai were dangerous for exactly this reason. They had reclaimed the gap. And in that gap lived freedom, but also something unexpected that most people never discover. Every morning in feudal Japan, before the sun rose, a warrior would wake and sit in darkness. No audience, no recognition, no visible result. He would regulate his breathing, quiet his mind, check his posture, and simply be present. This ritual took maybe 10 minutes. Then he would go about his day and no one would ever know it happened. This is the victory that matters most and counts for least in the eyes of others. Modern culture has trained you to value only visible results. The promotion, the transformation photo, the achievement others can see and validate. But the samurai understood that everything visible rested on a foundation of invisible work, and the quality of that foundation determined whether anything built on top would last. The term shugyo described this kind of practice. It translates roughly as austere training, but the real meaning went deeper. Shugyo was the work you did when no one was watching, when there was no reward coming, when the only thing driving you was commitment to the path itself, not commitment to outcomes, not attachment to results, just the simple decision to show up and do what needed doing. Here's where most people lose their way. They start strong, full of motivation, eager to prove themselves. They tell everyone about their new commitment, post about their progress, seek validation for each small step, and slowly, without realizing it, they transfer their source of power from internal to external. The moment that shift happens, discipline becomes dependent on audience, and the first time no one notices is the first time they skip. In the Hagakure, a text recording samurai wisdom, there's a line that confuses modern readers. The way of the warrior is found in death. People interpret this as some morbid fixation, but the actual meaning points to this exact principle. When you act as if you're already dead, already invisible, already forgotten, you free yourself from the need for recognition. You do what's right because it's right, not because someone might see and approve. Think about the disciplines you've maintained longest in your life. Chances are they're things no one notices. The way you organize your thoughts, how you speak to yourself internally, small rituals that ground you. These persist not because they earn praise, but because they serve you directly. Now think about the disciplines you abandoned. How many collapsed when the external validation dried up? The samurai trained for battles they might never fight. They perfected techniques they might never use. They maintained readiness for threats that might never come. From the outside, this looks wasteful. All that effort for nothing. But from the inside, the effort was everything. The readiness itself was the victory. This is the shift that transforms discipline from burden to practice. You stop measuring success by outcomes and start measuring it by showing up. Did you do the thing you committed to do today? That's the only question that matters. Not whether it led anywhere, not whether anyone noticed. Just, did you keep your word to yourself? In Zen monasteries, monks sweep the same floors every day. The floors aren't dirty. The sweeping accomplishes nothing visible, but the practice accomplishes everything invisible. It teaches you that the value isn't in the clean floor. The value is in becoming someone who does what needs doing, whether it needs doing or not. Here's the truth that might sting. No one cares about your discipline as much as you think they do. Your transformation, your commitment, your daily practice, it barely registers in other people's lives. This can feel discouraging, like your effort doesn't matter, but it's actually liberating. Because when you stop performing discipline for others and start practicing it for yourself, it becomes infinitely easier to maintain. The samurai knew their truest battles happened in moments no one would ever hear about. The urge to sleep past sunrise resisted in darkness. The fear faced alone. The standard maintained when cutting corners would go unnoticed. These were the victories that built character, and character was the only thing that mattered when real challenges arrived. You can spend your whole life chasing visible victories and never develop the foundation to sustain them. Or, you can invest in the invisible work, the silent practice, the discipline no one sees. That investment compounds in ways external achievements never do. Because every time you keep your word to yourself in private, you become someone whose word means something. This is what the masters meant by winning the battle before it begins. They weren't talking about strategy or tactics. They were talking about becoming the kind of person for whom discipline isn't a struggle anymore. It's just who you are. And that only happens through invisible victories, repeated so many times that they stop being victories and start being breath. The warrior you're becoming exists in the quiet moments no one will ever applaud, and that's exactly where your real strength lives.